Welcome on into Gold Sheet TV Week 15 preview. A little bit of recap of Week 14 as well. And Newbie and I are going to be discussing the two tightest playoff races right now, the AFC and the NFC South. Are any of the teams in those divisions even any good? We don't know, but we know that one of those teams are going to have to win those divisions. So we will get talking to that, and then we'll end the show discussing from Thursday night football. But Newbie, quick recap. We had a nice little week, didn't we?
Yeah, man, we've been rolling here for the last couple of weeks. I of course reverted back to my old 1-1 split. However, we did have an outright dog win. Part of what giveth and taketh away from us doing the show on Thursday is I thought Geno Smith was likely going to be playing against the 49ers when I gave out Seattle at the 10.5. He gets announced out. The line moves to 13.5. And if you got it at the closing bell, you have a winner. If you bet with us on Thursday, which we graded at, we had a loser. For what it's worth, still would have liked the play if I would have known Locke was going on there. It was more a situational play than anything. We would have loved to get those extra 3 points. But hey, that's the way the cookie crumbles. And sometimes, that's why betting early in the week, sometimes it can be great for you. Other times it burns you. The one that didn't matter what number you bet it at early in the week at +6, got it late in the week at 3.5, or even lower at close was the Jets. That's right, the Jets, Jets. My man CJ Stroud goes down early in the game, and the Jets offense looked like an actual offense for the first time in recent memory. That's for sure. They win outright, so that was a nice, easy cash there. So we like both of those. But of course, the prop, not even close. The Eagles offense, we thought they would bounce back a little bit. They moved the ball at least against the 49ers defense. They didn't even score a touchdown. All field goals, and then the defense outscored the Eagles offense. So the prop play for me, I screwed up your great parlay because yours wasn't even close. That thing flew over with Debo again, man. So another nice winning week, and especially with the plays that you gave, if people backed every play, it was a profitable week for you.
Yeah, beautiful. Chicago Bears get that outright W as well. Another very impressive performance for the Chicago Bears. A quick story. So I accidentally, a month or 2 months ago at this point, I meant to take the Bears under 4.5 wins for the rest of the season, but I didn't check my ticket and I took over. So now your boy has an extra little cash going on from that win on the Lions. Mistake. I
That's the
did not need to
best.
do that. I will gladly take that W. But the Las Vegas Raiders, they come up with a push on that bet because it was three. Never got the 3.5.
Yep.
So unless you found a 3.5, 120 in an alternate line market, you probably got that push there. Debo Samuel, he loves playing the Seahawks. Like I was listening to those numbers for the last show. He's also just an absolute stud no matter who he plays. But that was just 154-yard touchdown later, and that was at the window. But Newbie, we have a lot to discuss. We have a huge slate of games. We're going to discuss more games than normal probably on Thursday because I do love this slate. This might be a quick little recap and preview of what's to come. But the two tightest divisional races right now we have going on are the AFC South and the NFC South. We're going to start with the AFC South because things are getting very interesting. We talked a lot about the AFC playoff picture in general, but we're going to hone in specifically on what's going down. You have the Jaguars, who are sitting at 8-5, and then you have right behind them the Indianapolis Colts at 7-6, the Houston Texans at 7-6. We saw CJ Stroud go down with a concussion, and obviously that's a huge factor. But the fact that, again, Nico Collins is a little bit banged up, he left the game early. Dalton Schultz hasn't played in 2 weeks. And, of course, Tank Dell is out. Not to mention Will Anderson on the defensive side of the ball, the rookie's been playing well, is banged up. So it seems like the Texans are getting beat up at the wrong time. Then you have the Colts who, while, don't get me wrong, the Texans are certainly a surprise team for this season, the Colts are every bit a surprise team as well. So, Newbie, after the flaws we've seen in this Jaguars defense, and now this offense too, going to be missing Christian Kirk, who's huge for them, and just has had their general issues, mostly defensively. Do you think one of these Texans or Colts teams take over that spot from the Jaguars? And do you think that two AFC South teams will make the playoffs? Or do you think it's just going to be the division winner, and then maybe the Broncos, Bills, or Bengals end up usurping those other two AFC South teams that are currently in the playoff picture?
Yeah, I think, a lot to unpack there. For the AFC South, I would be pretty surprised if we had two representatives come out of that division simply because of what we're seeing outside of the AFC and the surge that's going on there. And the fact that Don't look now, but over in the West, the Broncos are live to win the conference, so over or win the division over there. So what? Don't sleep on potentially having a Chiefs sneaking in the wild card if all breaks the way of a potential head coach of the year candidate in Sean Payton. But we'll focus in here on the AFC South. And like you mentioned, the Jags, they're still in the driver's seat, but it does seem like the sky has been falling a little bit there. Definitely the script, so to speak, out on how to attack that defense. And now that you're looking with 4 games left in the year, this is really where that first place schedule can really hurt you. I mean, they have to go and have Baltimore come to town, who Baltimore sitting atop the division. They are looking like they can potentially cruise to the 1 seed and a bye and get home field throughout the playoffs. That would be nice for me telling you before the season to bet them to win the AFC and potentially win the Super Bowl, but we'll save that for another show when we go back and look at our futures. But then Jacksonville also has to get on the road and travel and take on a Tampa Bay team that we're going to talk about here in a while. That Tampa Bay and Jacksonville game could actually nearly help decide 2 different division races, one in the NFC and one in the AFC. So, as you mentioned, the concerns for me with Houston, I think Houston has already, definitely overexceeded their expectations. Don't get me wrong. But now with all the injuries stacking up, I think, you could maybe see them start falling by the wayside. And then this Colts team, I just don't know how to bet them. You know what I mean? Like the market ended up falling in love with them a little bit, but then the late money came for the Bengals. They end up not even being close in that game. And then they have to take on a Pittsburgh defense that's able to make quarterbacks struggle a little bit. So I just look at the remaining schedules, and that's really why I try and decide who can make some ground. And EP, we would be remiss if we didn't mention the fact that the Titans, some way, somehow rising from the dead last night, winning outright as 13.5-point underdogs. They have 2 games against Houston left on their schedule. They have a game against Jacksonville. This Titans team wins out. Like, I feel like this division is murkier than ever. It's so hard for me to come on and prognosticate and decide who I think has it, because just when you think you have a grasp on this league, the Titans end up winning outright as 13.5-point underdogs. So I'm wondering, how do you look at this division? Sure, it's the Jags and they're in the driver's seat and it's their division to lose. We've been waiting for Jags to lose this division all year long, and you look at the remaining schedules, I would argue they probably have the toughest one left out of the 4 teams, correct?
Yeah, so I'm with you. And going back to the preseason, you and I were both very bearish on Jacksonville, but it was just more so like the Jaguars should have never. They're like minus a buck 70 to win the AFC South
Yep.
preseason. It's just like, okay, like that was never a case. Now it looks like they're going to potentially, come through and win this division and do that thing. But I'm gonna have to say though, the Titans, I think that their shot. I think last night was great, but that was like the stereotypical like Mike Vrabel performance. Like this team's gonna play on prime time
Fair.
at max 2 times a season, and they're gonna play their best game of that season both those times, especially as underdogs. It's literally the mold and the role that Vrabel has, epitomized his coaching career so far. You count out the Titans, they come and beat up an amazing football team, but they could be the people or the team to really stir the pot and like kind of screw with their divisional rivals, because like you said, those 2 games against the Texans that they have on their schedule can really put a dent in the Texans season and a damper in
Mhm.
there. But what I'm going with here is I think that the Texans are, I'm sorry to our producer, big Texas fan, I think that they're the team that's definitely the odd man out because the injuries are killing them. I think that that's tough. The
Yeah.
Titans being favorites this week, I think is a little bit overblown, but I think if CJ Stroud's ruled
Yep.
in, that number is going to come to a PK. So if you do like the Texans, normally we like to say tease later in the week, you might want to tease them up to the 6-point teaser now because you might be getting some good value there. But the Texans team then has to go and host the Browns, who I know the Browns defense is not as big of a juggernaut at home, but that's probably a loss. Then they play the Titans again. At least they host them, even if you talk about us to win. But then we're talking week 18, potentially being Texans Colts, win and get in. That doesn't even consider who else the other like the rest of the wild card situation has, because there's a huge race because you have teams like the Pittsburgh Steelers, the Cleveland Browns, the
Yep.
Denver Broncos, the Cincinnati Bengals, and the Buffalo Bills all fighting for a spot. So long-winded way of saying I think the Texans are shot. I think the Colts, it really comes down to this week. It's a very bland blanket statement. but I think that the Steelers do beat them this week. Then I don't think the Colts going into Atlanta, though Minshew has been better in a dome, is conducive to their success. So I do think that the Jaguars, even if they do lose this week, I think then would be a good spot to finally buy back in on Jacksonville because they go to Tampa Bay, which should not be a huge problem for them. The Jaguars have been better on the road this year, host the lowly Panthers, and then end in the Titans game where they could already have their fate sealed in Tennessee. But newbie, I've been such a detractor, but I am going to say that I think that neither the Colts nor Texans get in, and I think the Jaguars end up just winning the division at a 10-7 record there.
Yeah, I think the final record is a great breakdown there because I'm kind of with you. I don't think they beat Baltimore. And honestly, I don't know if they go to Tampa Bay and win that game either. But can you get Tennessee after the whole sky has fallen to end the season, and you just put the free space on the bingo card with Carolina? Like we picked our one spot with Carolina. There's no buy signs that you have on with them the rest of the way. So I feel like I would agree with you as far as it stands. However, all it takes is one of these wonky wins and this whole division gets thrown into chaos. And one thing I will say finally about the Colts and why I'm with you that I don't think, and that's why I don't think you're going to have multiple teams from this division in the wild card conversation is because the Colts, you might look at it and say, oh, thank goodness, they get 3 games at home to end the season. Then they only have to have one trip into Atlanta. I like them more at Atlanta on the road than I do at home, especially with Gardner Minshew. This team just hasn't played well at home. They're 5-2 away, and then I think they're only 2-4. I don't have the numbers in front of me at home. They've only gotten 2 home wins this season. So, sure, okay, great. You get the Raiders at the home. Whoever knows about how that team's going to end up playing. So I'm kind of with you, man, because they have that one game up on everyone. I don't know if we have enough that someone can jump over them, but I do think it'll be a little bit of an interesting race. I don't think you're going to be getting any X next to anyone's name towards until the final week of the season ends.
Yeah, and that's what Roger Goodell and co. want from the National Football League for there to be those Week 18 divisional games, meaning something. And this certainly fits the mold. It's just like from an overall team perspective. But don't get me wrong, the Jaguars defense is abysmal. Like Joe Flacco going all over them. We obviously saw the primetime game with Jake Browning going and just absolutely destroying them. But all things considered, they're definitely, in my opinion, the best team of the 3. I was hesitant to admit that, but the Colts defense is worse than the Jaguars defense, which is saying something. And the Texans defense is just as bad, somewhere in the middle of how bad the Colts and Jaguars defense is as well. But then again, you're talking about teams like the Buffalo Bills, who, yes, have a tough schedule, but they also are in a position where if they keep winning football games, they can even win the AFC East. And then the Dolphins are a wild card team. And you're telling me the Colts or Texans are usurping the Dolphins? Like when you put it that way, there's no shot. I know they lost last night. I know Tyreek Hill, this and that, but I that's when I put it that way. I don't see that. So we're both going to be in somewhat of agreement that it's Jaguars or bust. And again, that's a very not hot take, but I do hope that the Texans or the Colts or even both of them win this week. So then maybe we can get a better price on Jacksonville to close out this season. Best quarterback, best situation there. But let's talk some NFC South now. Again, we talked a lot about the playoff picture ad nauseum, so we're focusing on the divisions. Right now, the 6-7 Buccaneers are the favorite. The Atlanta Falcons, I don't have the exact number, but I'm pretty sure if they won on Sunday, their chances of winning the South would have went from say 30% to 80%. And what do? They go and lose at the last second at home in that matchup. But Buccaneers, local schedule talk, heading to Green Bay, which is tough, hosting the Jaguars, which is tough, Saints, Bucks, which is just always going to be a battle. And then they get the lowly Panthers, but that's week 18. And then on the other hand, we're going to go Saints, Giants, who play hard, as we could say, Rams, who are better than the Saints, Buccaneers, crazy game, Falcons, Saints could be all for it. And then Falcons finish up with the Panthers, only laying 3. I have no interest in backing Carolina with even your money, newbie, but that could be the next trap of the year. Then Colts, Bears, Saints. So I'd argue the Falcons have the easiest path, but I'd also argue they're the worst of the 3 teams, especially with the injuries. Newbie, am I crazy for trusting and wanting to see Baker Mayfield playing meaningful football in January?
I'm with you, man. If it was from a fan perspective, take the better out of it, I would love to see a little bit of a resurgence for Baker Mayfield. And that would mean that my Eagles could potentially find a way that they would end up playing Baker Mayfield, which would be pretty nice, in my opinion. But man, I'm with you. Like trying to decide who gets it done is something I don't want to do in the NFC South because all of these teams, even trying to decide when they're going to cover spreads, has been an absolute nightmare. Look no further than the Saints. You know, the Saints, whenever they get over a field goal, it's so hard for me to back them. And then they end up, getting the job done and doing it in a rocking chair fashion. So, just like you mentioned, man, their game coming up this week could very well determine how the rest of it goes because I don't think New Orleans is going on the road and beating the Rams with how they're playing. The Rams were, some wonky things away from defeating the Baltimore Ravens this past week. And I don't know if it's any foregone conclusion that Tommy DeVito is not going to win his fourth out of 5 games that he's been playing here. He has that team buzzing. I mean, it was ugly. It was ugly how they got it done, but it would have been a much more comfortable win if you didn't have a freak fumble last night from Saquon Barkley. So I'm feeling the old DeVito magic that they're having there. So the Saints, I think that schedule is really tough the rest of the way, and I don't want to go into Tampa Bay and play a Baker Mayfield led team that really is buzzing. And now you look at the schedule for the Bucks as you laid out there. I don't know if I'm as worried, especially with Baker Mayfield, a guy who's played in bad conditions in his time in Cleveland, going to Green Bay and potentially playing in a cold game. And then you get to come home against the Jacksonville team. Who knows what the health is going to look like for that squad. And when your final game on the schedule gets to be the Carolina Panthers, you have to be pretty good of just saying, all right, if we win 2 out of these 3 games that we have before the Panthers, we're in a really good position here. Because I just look at that Falcons schedule and I don't think it's any foregone conclusion that they're going to go into Chicago, beat the Bears. I think this week, that's again the free space on the bingo card. But we've seen when it seems like the Falcons have that win that is locked, signed, sealed, delivered. Those are the games that they lose more than the ones that they maybe have to come from behind or play a little bit harder and maybe play as an underdog role. It kind of seems like Arthur Smith thrives in those a little bit more than whenever he's laying points. And I think when all is said and done, I said a lot here, but it comes down to Falcons Saints. That's probably going to decide the division. As much as I want the Bucks to be in the conversation at the end, it depends. If they get a win against Green Bay or Jacksonville, then you have a live ticket with the Bucks. But just as it stands right now, and the fact that both these other teams have some decent chances on the schedule, that Saints and Falcons game has to be the one that you circle because it's really the main crossover outside of that New Orleans Saints and Tampa Bay Bucks game. But fan in me wants Baker Mayfield, heart in me, it's gross. I think the Falcons end up winning the division. What about you?
Yeah, there was a lot of people who colleagues of ours that were really bullish on Atlanta to start the season, like preseason.
Yeah, I didn't
They
get it.
started well. I didn't get it either. Faltered. It's crazy how Baker Mayfield is arguably the best of the 3 quarterbacks of these teams. And whoever, the one thing I guess is going more so for the Saints than anybody, the Falcons have not been a great team at home. I mean, they're 4-3, but that's not anywhere amazing. Whoever wins this division is hosting a playoff game. I don't really have beefs with this being the way the NFL works. I like the fact that there are divisions that are meaningful. I don't care if you're 6-10, but you make the playoffs when you're a division, or 7-10, you host a game. You know what? That's what it is. What it is. But
yep.
The Giants, after what they did, it's definitely going to be a come down spot. We actually saw some movement in the market this morning. The Saints opened at 4.5, 5, and got bet up not too long before recording to 6, where it's sitting, which I think is a fair number. Because it's probably an emotional spot for the Giants coming off Monday Night Football, riding high. But then they go to the Rams. The Rams are already going to be in California because they're hosting the Commanders this weekend. The Rams are the much better football team in that spot, and I expect them to be favored even after barring injury this week. this is when the schedule, like the first place schedule, is actually ruining the Bucs a little bit because they have to have
Yep.
this Packers team in Green Bay, where it's just very tough situation. The Buccaneers then hosting the Jaguars. The Jaguars have been the true road warriors of any team in the NFL this year. 5-1 on the road, 2 of those games being in London and just, playing better football on the road. Look at their splits. Then they host the Saints. And then Lattimore is not in there. Maybe Mike Evans could have another great game. Then the free square against the Buccaneers. It's going to shake out to be really interesting. None of these teams are fighting. I shouldn't say aren't fighting because they technically are in the race to also make the playoffs in the wild card, not only win the division. Though, please don't let that happen somehow, some way, because the NFC is just really a bad division. But I think I'm not putting any money on this, but gun to head, I want the Buccaneers. I do not want the Saints because Derek Carr has cost me more money than any other quarterback in the spot. And I think it's the Bucs though, because like I said, I said the Falcons beat the Panthers. The Colts are better than the Falcons. The Bears are better than the Falcons, and the Saints in Week 18 are better than the Falcons. So that's just we're not talking points here, newbie. We're just talking straight up money lines, and I want it to be the Buccaneers. I really do.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, the Falcons do have to leave their cushy dome 3 out of those last 4 games as well. So that is something to think about. That they are on the road for all of those, albeit one of them being against the Carolina Panthers. But no, again, I'm not let me hop in and pick the division winner kind of guy. I like looking at the potential spots and how it sets up. I just don't look at any of the teams this week outside of the Bucs in Green Bay as being a team that I would want to put money on this upcoming week. Like, I think this could be a really nice Bucs spot. I just think it concerns me, Green Bay coming off a loss. Green Bay won on Monday Night Football. They come home. They're feeling good. Coming off of a loss and getting to come home. That's the one team that I maybe would put on my short list, but the spot might keep me off of them. So again, I think it's fun to look at the divisions as a whole. It's just not something that I personally, try and find and make money on. I'm a week by week situational guy through and through.
Yeah, and totally understand that. I like to dabble in these markets. I think there's a lot of
and you do good at it.
It's something that it's like an acquired talent, right? Like there are so many times where and obviously I'm not saying that this translates perfectly. Like if you're shooting the shit with your friends, talking football, like you might be making some statements about, oh, this team should win this division, this team should win that division. And you could be talking about a team that on one sports book is hanging a plus 185 while the others are hanging, plus 120s. And next thing you know, you're holding a great bet. So a lot of avenues and something I'm looking actually to improve on moving forward. I think it's something just very interesting. And there's a lot of opportunity doing this because like I've talked about before with future markets, even if you're betting in season, if you can build things like a portfolio, like if you timed the AFC South market properly to start the season, as well as currently still looking onto it. I don't have this in front of me. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I would bet right now that if you could have a ticket on every single team to win the conference, and if anyone won, yes, you'd be losing 3 bets, but you'd still be winning money if you got the right prices on those division prices. So something to consider. Like obviously everyone wants to hit the 12-1 or the 50-1, preseason future. That's great. But a lot of the times when you see on Twitter or other professional bettors, they cash a 50-1 ticket, there were probably 10 other dead 25-1, 50-1, 100-1 tickets on other players. It's a smart thing to go.
But also, if you manage that correctly and you have a spreadsheet and you're budgeting out, okay, here's how much I profit. Yeah, you're going to have your favorite team that you make the most profit, but you can lock in a profit. It's funny that you mention it because again, it's not something that I really do in NFL. I think it's a little bit tougher, but and the folks who follow me on Twitter at Newbie Talks know, I do handicapping on the Premier Lacrosse League, and there's 8 teams, and by the end of the year, 9 times out of 10, I have a future on all 8 of the teams, and I'm making money on it. So I completely agree. You find your spots, you find the value potential, and you manage that bankroll. If that is something that you do with your portfolio, it's not for me as far as the NFL goes. It really can be a nice way to, at the end of the year, say, oh, maybe I struggled against sides, against totals, this, that, and the other thing. But because of the future market, I'm breaking even or I'm making a little extra coin. It can be something worthwhile, but it does take a hell of a lot of time and a hell of a lot of planning to do.
And if you listen to us when we talked about Newbie before the first Eagles-Cowboys game, even though the Dak Prescott and the Cowboys lost that game, What was my
Yeah.
advice? Take Dak Prescott in the MVP market. He was like 30-1 at that point. And then a couple
Yep.
weeks ago, my advice was take Brock Purdy at 15-1. And now you have the two odds-on favorites at
Yep.
15-1 and 30-1 if you were listening there. So there is a million different ways to skin this cat that we love. That is sports betting. But newbie, let's talk about an ugly as hell Thursday night game. I do have a player prop for this one, and it's going to be chalky
Ooh.
as can be, but I think it's great. You have the Las Vegas Raiders hosting the Chargers, laying 3. Justin Herbert officially out for the remainder of the season. Not like he was playing great anyway. Not going to get into that conversation right now. Total, what you saw on the odds screen, 34. It's fair. Tell me, newbie, like, are we seeing a Patriots Steelers type game where everyone's hammering the under because these teams are under teams, but then it goes over because, football? Or you want nothing to do with this one? Any props, anything?
Here's the thing for me, and it's disgusting, and we won't belabor the point. We're going to get EP's player prop. We're going to get my thoughts on this game, and then we're going to get you the hell out of here. Because this might be, we did the ugly dog edition. This might be just the ugliest edition of GoldSheet. We had to talk NFC South, AFC South, gross. And then we top it off with this Thursday night football, the cherry on top of the caca Sunday. I'll tell you what, though. The look-ahead line on this game, the total was 42.5. And then the Herbert news comes, he's on the IR, and that horrible, unwatchable game between the Vikings and the Raiders happened. And now we were all the way down to, I think it was around like 32-33. And now a little bit of over money is starting to trickle in. And that's the way that I'm going to go in this one. Thursday night football over, even at the posted number 34. I like it, man. I think that look ahead line was a little bit more indicative of what we can expect in this game. Because sure, the points weren't there for Easton Stick, but he also came. There was no way he thought at the start of that game that he was going to be playing in that game. And he at least was able to have a decent enough completion percentage. It had 9 incomplete passes, 179 yards in a game that he didn't even really know what he was to do there. The one little buy sign that I had for the Chargers was we finally saw Austin Eckler play football again. Like, he was running, and I was like, oh my God, is that Eckler? Because we hadn't seen him play with that speed this entire season. It kind of seemed like he was, like a broken down washing machine and just very laboring. But he made some nice plays that got me a little bit excited. And I just think with the market doesn't want to bet over on either of these teams because it's a backup quarterback, technically a backup quarterback for both ways. The Raiders just came off a game that they couldn't even move the ball against the Vikings even a little bit. But the game prior to that, they drove against the big bad Chargers defense, put up 17 points in that one. So at 34, it's just a little bit low for me. I'm going to be going over in the disgusting game of the week on Thursday Night Football. What say you?
Yeah, and I don't blame you. Like, I was actually going to bring up this point, relates, but a little bit of a digression. Like, we were at the point in the season where markets they're always sharp, but they're like so inefficient now that, like, when I'm writing the GoldSheet Monday morning, like for the last 14 weeks, there would be at least like 5 spots where I look at and I'm just like, this line is off. This total is off. Like, I'm not even looking at the number yet. I'm like, under. And I look at the number, it's 44, and I'm like, under. Like, yes, like that's a key number. I'm going under. Now we're at the point where I'm seeing a matchup like this. Obviously, I look at the matchup at Thursday. I think it's under. And I see a total of 33.5. Like, that's a little too low for my liking. It probably is over adjusted at this point. But digression aside there, I think that the spread is just beyond fair. Obviously, having a full week of Easton Stick. It's not even a full week, obviously, because this is a short week. But him having to prepare, play with the first team offense is probably going to benefit him. And backup QBs in their first start without any film like this always do overperform expectation. However, I have a feeling, and there's no method to this madness, which is why this isn't a bet for me at this moment, barring new information. But the Chargers must hate Brandon Staley, like the players. Like, he's been the coach for how many ever years now? Like, yeah, he made the playoffs last year.
Too long.
Comeback loss there. And now there's nothing exciting about this team. There is literally nothing to play for. Like, yeah, they're still in the race, but they're not winning crap. Let's be honest here. And on the other hand, the Las Vegas Raiders, they are punching above their weight class for most of the season. They're playing for an interim coach who I'm sure they respect because they do put on solid performances. And I would just say that if there's one team here that's going to crap the bed I think it would be the Chargers, and not just because, oh, Easton Stick sucks, he's not Herbert. Like maybe that is too, thinking not far deep into this. Maybe you have to peel back the onion a little bit more, but I think it's more so that the Raiders have a higher motivation spot here to kind of say F you to a divisional opponent that's down worse than they are. But going over to the player props here, I'm not overthinking anything right now. I'm going with Davante Adams over 65.5 receiving yards at DraftKings. You could say, Eric, that's so obvious, this and that. But obviously, if you've been paying attention, it's not like Davante Adams has been lighting up the scoreboard. He's probably going to have to be traded in a month and a half from now. But what it comes down for me is two very simple things. Los Angeles Chargers are last in the National Football League in middle of the field EPA. And they're also 18th in middle of the field attempt percentage, meaning that teams throw the ball on them in the middle of the field. And they're 21st in neutral pass rate, meaning in general, teams like to throw the ball on them. You go with the Las Vegas Raiders, they're middle of the pack, 16th or 17th, 16th in middle of the field EPA, but 6th in middle of the field attempts, meaning they target the middle of the field a ton. And Davante Adams, middle of the field so far this season, he has a 94 PFF grade in the dead middle of the field and then 91.4 in the short middle of the field. And also, last but not least, Los Angeles Chargers are 29th in the NFL in DVOA, 2 wide receiver ones. So I expect Davante Adams to have a great game. And this number is just for a guy like Davante Adams. I know it's been lighting up the stat sheet. It's just too low. It's 65.5 yards. I think Davante Adams over, given how these two teams play. And yes, earlier in the season, it was not O'Connell at quarterback, but he did go for 8 for 75 against this same, if not worse now, Chargers D. Any pushback here, newbie? Any final thoughts?
No, I think it makes a heck of a lot of sense to me, man. And like you said, okay, sometimes it gets chalky, sometimes, but the fact that you're even seeing Davante Adams at a 65.5 tells you that it hasn't been the season they really expected. And I think it's also factoring in just the absolute slog fest that it was last week, which I think is why we have some market over corrections, as you said. So let's get Davante Adams, not only get the yardage, let's get him in the end zone 1 or 2 times so that we can cash this over for me. And then when we talk on Thursday's show, we'll be happy with some potential money making opportunities on Thursday Night Football.
Yeah, certainly. And Thursday, I'm expecting a bigger show. I personally love the board, newbie. No pressure on your end, so I'll gladly find some more games we'll get through. But we have the Saturday slate, which is awesome, full Sunday slate, and then 1 Monday Night Football game. But that'll wrap us up for now. It was great discussing the NFC and AFC South. Not the best divisions, but interesting playoff races. And this is what Roger Goodell just somehow keeps sucking us back in with these matchups. And newbie, we'll be back on Thursday talking best bets. So we want to thank everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you guys on Thursday.